Clean code. Clean code is code that's readable, reusable, and refactorable, and I'm going to be talking about how to write clean code in JavaScript. Specifically, this is about functions. This is part one of my clean code functions. The first thing to consider when writing functions is the function arguments. Ideally, there should be 2 or fewer arguments. So instead of having this function with 1, 2, 3, 4 arguments, we're going to pull the arguments into an object. We're going to put and then we're just going to call the menu with just the one argument. The next thing is that functions should do only one thing. You can see in this function, it's function email clients. It's sending the clients in, and for each client, it's setting the client record equals database.lookup client, and then if client record is active, it's going to email client. So it's actually doing 2 things. It's checking if the client is active, and then it's emailing the client. So a better way would be to change this into 2 functions. So now we have the function email client, and it's going to only email the client. It's going to filter it by is client active, and that's going to call this other function is client active, which is going to look up the client, and it's going to return if it's active. So now instead of doing 2 things, there's 2 functions that each do one thing. Next up is that function name should say what they do. So look at this function. Function add to date, we're passing in a date, and we're going to pass in a month. So why are we passing in the month? What exactly are we adding? If you call this add to date, date 1, it's not exactly clear what's happening. So we're going to change this to add month to date, and then we're going to put the month first, and put the date second, and so we're going to add the first month to the date, and now it's more obvious that we're adding the month to date instead of just add to date, add month to date, so it's more clear what the function is doing. The next thing is that functions should only be one level of abstraction. This kind of goes along with functions should only do one thing. So let me put in a function here. And when you do split up functions, it leads to reusable and easier testing. So let's look at this function. We got parse better JSA alternative, and now this is a pretty long function, code. We're passing the code. We have the regexes. We have statements equals code.split, splitting at the space, and we have the tokens, empty array. Then for each regex, we're going to call this function for each of the statements. We have the const ast, empty array, tokens for each token, s.parse, s. for each node. And we're going to actually just try to break this up into a few different things. We're going to try to separate this into a few different things. We're going to separate this token section from the AST section, and let me just paste that in there, and then we can talk about it. Okay, so here's the original, and here's where it's broken up a little more. So we're going to end with the parse better JSA alternatives. Now that's the same as what the original function was called. But now, instead of doing all these things in one function, we're pushing out some of the things. So const tokens equals tokenized code, const ast equals lexer tokens, and then ast.for each node, and we're going to parse each one. So first, we're just going to get the tokens tokenize. So if you go up and tokenize, so we're gonna take this is basically just the first step of some of the things up there, and then we're going to take return the AST down here. So we're just breaking that up a little bit to make it more readable, and also so it's only one layer of abstraction for each function. So let's go to this next one, remove duplicate code. Duplicate code is bad because that means there's more than one place to change something if you need to change some logic. So if you only have code in one spot, then you only have to change it in one spot if something needs to be changed. So here's an example of 2 functions. Functions show developer list developers, developer for each developer, const expected salary equals developer.calculate expected salary, const experience equals developer.getExperience, const GitHub link equals developer.GitHub link. But if you look down here, functions show manager list managers, managers.for each manager, const expected salary equals manager.calculate expected salary, const experience equals manager.getExperience, const portfolio. So the only thing different between these 2 functions is one of them is called developer, one of them is called manager, and the developer has a GitHub link, and the manager has a portfolio, and then the data up here has the GitHub link, and the data down here is the portfolio, but the expected salary and the experience are the same. The expected salary and the experience are the same, so it's almost exactly the same. This is a perfect example of something that you should be able to break down so you don't have the duplicate code. So what we're going to do is we're going to completely remove this second function. And we're going to update this first one so it can apply to both developers and managers. So we're going to change this to just show list. And instead of passing in a developer, we're going to pass in an employee. And change this all at one time. I just did Command D after changing my settings, so it used Sublime Text key mappings. Now the GitHub link is things that's going to be different. So a GitHub link is still considered kind of a portfolio for developers. So we're going to call that portfolio, but here's where we're going to make it a little different. Okay, so we're going to do the employee.github link, but then down here, if we find out it's a manager, then we're going to get MBA projects. And since we're going to be possibly changing this, we're going to, instead of const, we're going to put let here, because let allows you to change and const does not. And if there is no GitHub link up here, this is just going to be either null, so then you can actually get the MBA projects down here. Now, for the const data, we're just going to change this to portfolio. And now we've just combined those two functions into one function. Last up is don't use flags as function parameters. Flags tell your user that the function does more than one thing. Functions should just do one thing, so you can split out your functions if they're following different code paths based on a Boolean. For example, if you have this function create file, we have the name and temp. If temp function fs.create, and you're going to create this, else fs.create name. So it's based on what this Boolean is, or what this flag is. Instead of doing it like this, we can take off this temp here, and just if we need to create the file, we can do that, and we're not going to have an else, we're just going to have another function. So if you need to create the temp file, then you just call a different function. There, instead of just one function that you use a Boolean or a flag to figure out what you're going to do, just create two functions, and you just call a different function depending on what you want to do. Well, that's it for part 1 of functions. Thank you for watching JS Nuggets. There's a link in the description to where I got a lot of these ideas from. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, use your code for good.